We know that children who enter kindergarten not school ready have more difficulties catching up. We typically think of these types of readiness skills as those tied to language development, literacy, and knowing your numbers. This body of research has led to significant investments in Head Start, pre-kindergarten education, and other enrichment programs. What we don't know is whether there's a unique contribution of social behavioral readiness on academic outcomes. If social behavioral readiness confers its own separate effect on academic outcomes, and those skills are learned in the context of a parenting relationship, we may need to rethink or expand our strategies for closing the achievement gap. In this study, we examine the impact of not being socially and behaviorally ready for kindergarten on 3 costly academic outcomes: being retained in grade, receiving services and supports through an individualized education plan or a 504 plan, and being suspended or expelled from school at least once by 3rd grade. Our goal is to use this information to inform early intervention efforts for strengthening children's social behavioral skills prior to and during the transition to kindergarten. So I'm now going to turn this over to Amie, who's going to talk about the study methods and results.
Thanks, Debbie. So this study took advantage of access to administrative data from the Baltimore City Public School System. And the data was on 2 different cohorts of students enrolled in city schools. The first entered kindergarten in the fall of 2007, and we followed them through 3rd grade, which was in 10-11 for students who were on time. And the second cohort entered kindergarten in the fall of 2009, and again we followed them up through 3rd grade in 12-13. Just over 50% of the students in each cohort were boys. Over 85% were African American, and between 80 and 90% qualified for the free and reduced price meals program, an indicator of poverty. And between 80 and 83% of students in each cohort had attended some type of formal schooling prior to kindergarten, such as pre-K, Head Start, or other daycare. The measure that we used for this, the primary measure that we used in the study, is the Maryland Model for School Readiness, which is a portfolio-based assessment developed by the University of Michigan. This assessment, teachers rate student skills within the first 60 days of kindergarten on 30 items representing 7 domains of readiness on a 3-point scale from proficient, in process, or needs development. The 7 domains are listed here. They include language and literacy, mathematical thinking, scientific thinking, social studies, physical development, the arts, and personal and social development. The personal and social development domain, which we'll refer to as social behavioral readiness, is the focus of this study and includes 4 items to measure children's ability to show initiative and self-direction, follow classroom rules and routines, use classroom materials purposefully and respectfully, and interact cooperatively with others. Raw scores on each domain are converted into one of 3 categories, which are developing, approaching, and fully ready, based on the total points obtained. And prior research supports the reliability and validity of this measure. So in this study, each of the cohorts included over 6,000 students. However, we only included students in the present research who had kindergarten readiness scores on the Maryland Model for School Readiness and remained in Baltimore City Public Schools consistently up to 4th grade so that we could accurately determine grade retention. In our study, all school readiness scores were dichotomized so that all of our analyses, all students either scored as either developing or approaching on a given domain were identified as not ready, and students scoring as fully ready reflected a separate category that we used as our reference group. Because we were primarily interested in the relationship between a child's level of social behavioral readiness and whether the student was retained in grade, received services or supports through an IEP or 504 plan, and was suspended or expelled, we wanted to control for other student characteristics and other types of readiness that influence social behavioral readiness and our outcomes. Therefore, we controlled for as many relevant variables as were available in our administrative data. And these included student gender and race ethnicity, whether the student was chronically absent in kindergarten, whether the student was an English language learner in kindergarten, whether they qualified for the free and reduced price meals program in kindergarten, whether they had attended some form of formal preschool, and the other 6 domains of the MMSR. In addition, because students are nested within schools, we wanted to control for school-level influences, so those are taken into account in all of our analyses. Unfortunately, we didn't have data connecting students to separate teachers, so we could not control for the influences of individual teachers, but we did nest within school to take into account some of that bias. We analyzed the 2 cohorts separately to examine generalizability across testing years. And we also looked at 2 different sets of analyses in terms of the impact of social behavioral readiness in kindergarten, and then the impact of social behavioral readiness on outcomes by the time students reached 4th grade.